guys ready? Let's get right into it. I, unlike Sean, picked some shorter stories because I found them just as creepy and just as effective. So, this one is written by Scooty Puff. It says, you know, on cold days, inside your car where you can breathe on the window and draw on the glass. I got into my car, and as I look at the windshield, I see a few small baby hands. I thought it was strange that someone would let a baby play on my car's windshield. And for some reason, I had an urge to touch the baby prints. And as I touched them, I wiped them away. The handprints were made from inside my locked car. The next one is called The Attic Ghost. I used to live in a house that was built on old farmland, and I slept in a bedroom that had no door, except for the door leading up to the attic, which had a little sliding lock on it. Every single night, I'd close the door and lock it. The attic frequently had birds and such get into it, and I didn't feel like having them fly out. Except every single morning, it would be unlocked and slightly ajar. During the night, I'd wake up and have sleep paralysis. It was pretty frequent, and I got used to it. During said sleep paralysis, a figure would open up the closet and slip out. This one goes, I'm a psychiatric nurse, and early in my career, I worked at a residential mental health facilities. One of our residents was an elective mute, which means that he wouldn't talk. But there was no medical reason as to why. He had spoken earlier in his life and in fact seemed quite normal back then, with the exception of being close to 7 foot tall. He'd been raised in the deep south and joined the military when he was 19. But one night, he vanished. He was declared AWOL, and eventually declared missing and dead. 10 years later, a 7 foot tall man walked into the VA hospital emergency room in my part of the Midwest and said to the receptionist, "My name is Marion Duchenne," not his real name, "and I've been dead for 10 years. Those were the last words he ever spoke. He was covered with dust and wearing the same clothes he had been reported to be wearing the night that he vanished. His social security number had not been used. He had no identification upon his person. However, they were able to identify him, I guess, via fingerprints. The family was notified and said they had already grieved their lost man and that whomever was claiming to be him simply could not be. And they demanded not to be contacted again. Marion paced all day, every day, moving his mouth that looked like talking or muttering, but no sounds came out. He had an unnerving habit of throwing his head back with his mouth wide open as though he were laughing heartily, but not even a breath could be heard. If I talked to him, he appeared to listen, periodically throwing his head back in that laughter-mimicking way of his. Various medications were tried, but they did not affect him either positively or negatively. Occupational therapy did nothing because Marion would just grin, and unless told to stay put, he would get up and start pacing again. On the last day of that job, the last thing I saw was Marion pacing the parking lot, throwing his head back to laugh. Later, I wondered if all along I'd been dealing with a ghost. All these years later, I still don't know. That's so strange. I can't imagine your family not wanting to see you, even if they thought you were dead. I would have to see that person to see if they were my family. Anyway, the next one is called the Unrest Stop. I was driving across country with my mom and sister when I was 16. My sister was 20. It was late, but we were well rested and still alert. We were driving along an interstate and we needed gas and a bathroom break, so we stopped at the only rest stop in 200 miles. There was a van full of teenagers on a road trip at this gas station, as well as a small gray car parked at the pump in front of us, with 2 young men standing still outside of it. When we got there, everything felt wrong. We'd been on the road for days and seen many rest stops at night, and we had never been afraid until then. My mom and sister went in, and I stayed in the car. I heard the teenagers say they were creeped out because they couldn't get the pump to work. Or they were creeped out and couldn't get the pump to work, and they left in a hurry. I was watching the car in front of us, and the 2 men had not moved at all. Not 1 inch. They weren't on the phones. They were just standing there, still as stone. My sister and mom came running back out to the car, and when they got in, the 2 men slowly turned to look at us, while not moving or pivoting the rest of their bodies. And I swear we all saw the same thing. place as dark as pitch and empty, truly empty. Not black, not reflecting any light at all, just a void. We sped out of there and we did not stop until we were in the next city. The worst thing about the entire experience, we couldn't find the place on any map. We knew exactly which spot on the interstate to look, but we couldn't find it on Google Maps or any paper map that we had. We even asked locals about that creepy gas station on that stretch of road and only got confused looks. We have traveled that interstate since, and there is no rest stop. The next one is called It Came For Us in the Graveyard. We were driving by my friend's We were driving my friend's really old, beat-up Subaru through a massive graveyard. We stopped and walked down a hill and came across a little pond. There was someone sitting on a rock on the other side of the pond. The figure itself was all black, and we couldn't make out any features other than the fact that it looked like a man who was wearing some old-style top hat. We stupidly waved and shouted hi. He didn't show any acknowledgement and continued sitting still on the rock. All of a sudden, he jumped to his feet and started voice from nowhere say, "My name. Move." My wife looked at me, and I looked at her, and I said loudly, "You got it, bud." We moved out 2 days later and stayed with the family. The old lady who owned the place died a few months later, and the house was torn down. It is still an empty lot to this day, nothing but grass and a tree. I still drive by it every now and again. The next story is titled, "The Death March." My dad used to work as a corrections officer at a rural prison. He drove the perimeter of the property for his entire shift, where he would check empty buildings for runaway inmates. It was generally a boring job. One night, my dad was parked on a hill reading a magazine when he started to feel a thumping in his body. He described it as the feeling you get when the speakers are playing a song with really heavy bass. He put the magazine down and checked his rearview mirror, where he saw someone outside of his truck. He grabs his gun and jumps out with his weapon drawn. Once he gets outside the truck, he realizes it's a procession of Native Americans walking through the truck and directly through his seat, only to disappear at the exact spot he was sitting. He said it was clear they were ghosts because many of them appeared injured. This went on for a few minutes, and then the whole procession disappeared. He called the other perimeter guy on his walkie to try to explain, and the other guy almost immediately stopped communicating. Turns out the other guy had seen this happen before, but he didn't believe in ghosts, so he wouldn't talk about it. The next one is called The Demon's Room. I worked as a forensic nurse in a hospital's lockup unit. We had one older lady who swore she was being haunted and abused by a demon she would call Darius. So many crazy things happened while she was on the unit. We'd go in the room, do normal care, and leave, and seconds later she would just start screaming bloody murder. We'd run in the room to find her looking like she'd been in a fight with a boxing champ. Bloody lip, black eye, markings all over her body. No one ever saw her doing this stuff to herself. Things would get moved around the room by themselves. At one point, she was even in, protective restraints because the doctor thought she was hurting herself. There was no way she could have moved or done anything to herself while in these restraints. But new marks would always appear, and her tray or cart would be across the room. The room was secure, so there was no other way someone else was doing this. When you asked her questions, she would just say it was Darius. After she was discharged, we always had trouble with that room. If there was going to be a rapid response or a code, it happened in that room. One night, a guard reported lights blinking on and off, and it was in that room. So, I have a couple stories to, sort of stories to add to the end of this video that some of these Reddit stories reminded me of. So, the story where it talked about death coming for her father. When my father died, it was, and I've told these stories before, so sorry if you've heard it already. It was very strange because my father got sick and died very suddenly. He went in the hospital on Sunday and died on a Tuesday. It was very fast. Regardless, I just so happened to have that Tuesday off of work, and my sister and I had gone to the hospital, and he kept asking for my brothers. He kept asking where are the boys, where are the boys? So, and they had told us that day that it wasn't looking very good, and they'd called in the hospice people and stuff. So I called my brothers, my sister, we each called one, and my oldest brother picked up my brother that's now passed away, and they came up. And, before they came up, I went back upstairs to tell my dad that they were coming. And he ex, the one I call Captain Crazy Face. His name is Joshua. Y'all know I cried about him in a video at one point long ago. Regardless, he was Native American, and every Labor Day, his tribe has a powwow. It is one of the coolest things I have ever seen, but the songs, the sounds of the drums, and the eeriness of the singing that they do, when I read that story, I could just hear the drums and the sound of the ghosts singing, so that gave me the willies. Anyway, I'm gonna read you a couple stories from these books that I have now realized you will not even be able to see me show them to you because I had camera issues. Had to stop filming, and now I'm finishing. Regardless, spooky. I have one marked in Spooky Southwest, so we'll start with, oh, I almost dropped it on my face. Y'all would have laughed at that. Okay. I don't remember marking that. I don't think I marked that one. Okay. I know I marked some in the other book. Just kidding. We'll start with Spooky New York. Alright. I know I marked one that I was particularly interested in reading because of my finale last year. If you didn't watch it, you should go listen to The Legend of Sleepy Hollow from last Halloween. And I hope you enjoy this Halloween's story as well. So let's see. This story is called The Gallopingessien from Tarrytown, New York. The soldier was given command of the Prince Hereditary Regiment just days before they set sail from Germany, at the behest of George III, King of Great Britain and ruler of the German Principality of Hanover. The British king did not have enough soldiers in his own army to supply the needs of his commanders in America. So he signed a treaty with Frederick II, the Prince of Hesse-Kassel, who often rented out his soldiers in order to make ends meet. The soldier arrived in the American colonies in August 1776. We are not true mercenaries, the soldier mused as he came ashore on his first day in the New World. We receive no compensation for our services beyond our daily bread. It is our prince who grows rich from our military skills, not us. He must have spoken the last bit aloud, for his friend laughed and said, "That is true, mine friend, but let's not General Kniphausen hear you." Yeah, I'm pretty sure I said that wrong. The soldier quickly discovered that the American General George Washington was resting on Harlem Heights with the main body of his army. The Americans were watching the movements of the British General Howe from a five-sided earthwork named Fort Washington. Strange word. The fort was the principal fortification within the American lines, standing at 230 feet above sea level, with strong ravelins and outworks and 34 great guns. On October 12th, General Howe ordered the decided not to attack Washington's entrenched camp without reinforcements. Additional British troops soon came to his aid, but a severe rainstorm set in before they could attack, and it raged until twilight on October 31st. Washington, perceiving Howe's tactical advantage, withdrew his troops under the cover of darkness toward the Croton River. Howe did not follow. Instead, the British fell back and encamped on the heights of Fordham. After a council of war, Washington decided to retreat to New Jersey with a large portion of his army, leaving the New England troops on the east side of the Hudson to defend the passes into the Highlands. For many days following the Battle of White Plains, local residents and British troops gathered the dead and buried them. The Hessian soldier's body was discovered on Chatterton's Hill, but no one located his head, and so he was interred headless in the graveyard near Tarrytown. In the months following the battle, many of the good people living in Tarrytown went out of their way to avoid passing the cemetery after dark. There was something restless about it, folks said. Strange lights would appear in the graveyard around midnight, and one woman claimed to have heard the sound of an invisible horse galloping madly down the road. Most people treated the rumors as a funny joke and ignored them. However, a few of the older residents took care to mention a folk belief that they had learned in childhood, that evil spirits and ghosts did not care to cross running water. If the spirit haunting the graveyard ever bothered anyone, that person should make for the bridge as fast as his legs would carry him. One cold winter night in the early New Year, a certain Dutchman named Hans left the tavern in Tarrytown and started walking to his home in the hollow nearby. His path led next to the old cemetery where the Hessian soldier was buried. At midnight, Hans came within sight of the graveyard. The weather had warmed up during the week, and the snow was almost gone from the road. It was a dark night with no moon, and the only light came from his lantern and a few remaining patches of snow that sparkled when they caught the light. Hans was nervous about passing the graveyard, remembering the rumors of the galloping ghost he had heard in the tavern. He stumbled along, humming to himself to keep up his courage. Suddenly, his eye was caught by a light rising from the ground in the cemetery. He stopped, his heart pounding in fear. "Who's there?" he called, trying to act casual. The only response was a whooshing sound as the white mist burst forth from an unmarked grave and formed into a large horse carrying a headless rider. Hans let out a terrible scream as the horse leapt toward him at a full gallop. He took to his heels, running as fast as he could, making for the bridge where he prayed the fearful apparition would disappear. Hans could hear the pounding of the ghostly hoofs behind him, and he stumbled suddenly and fell, rolling off of the road into a melting patch of snow. The headless rider thundered past him, and Hans got a second look at the headless ghost. It was, he realized, wearing a Hessian commander's uniform. Hans waited a good hour after the ghost disappeared before crawling out of the bushes and making his way home. After fortifying himself with schnapps, Hans told his wife about the ghost, and by noon of the next day his wife had spread the story all over Tarrytown. The good Dutch folk were divided in their opinions. Some thought that the ghost must be roaming the roads at night in search of his head. Others claimed that the Hessian soldier